Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you're new here. My name is Leila and I'm so excited to film this video today. Today is actually 31st of December, but you'll be watching this I guess in a few days. I really hope I'll be able to edit it real quick to put it out there. I really wanted to share with you guys all of the books that I read this year, and it is 35. I'm very proud of myself because this is the first time I've read this many books in 1 year. My goal was 30 books, and I must say, I think I would have read more. Like, I think I would have reached 45 books have I not started my master's. However, I don't regret starting my master's because it was a long time coming. It was one of my goals, and it was always kind of not the right time to do it. So I'm nonetheless really proud of myself that I finally saved up enough to get my master's degree, and no regrets there. But yeah, I think I would have read much more books. Nonetheless, I'm proud of 35 books and I'm gonna rank them today with you. So let's look at my ranking list. So basically, tiers were created by me. We'll start with the worst of the worst that I called What a Waste of Paper and of my time, I must say. Next is Silly Little Books. Here I will put all those books that were not bad, but it's not like the best book I've ever read or the book that changed my life or made me a better person. These are just books that I'm glad I read. They were interesting. They required no mental capacity, no level of analyzing, you know what I mean? Kind of type of books that you will see on TikTok. And then we have honorary mentions. This is for those books that I just cannot put anywhere else, but they were important reads. However, it's hard for me to say whether they were good or bad. They were definitely relevant and definitely something useful, but I cannot put them like into the next categories. For example, Made My Year, books that are really good, but I wouldn't say they were creme de la creme. They're like one of my most favorite ones. But life changing tier is definitely those books that made it and will be forever cherished by me and changed my life. So I feel like everyone needs to read them. You know what I mean? So without further ado, let's begin. I'm gonna start recording my screen. Oh, and by the way, as it is December 31st, it's New Year's Eve tonight. And I'm wearing this cute little dress that I bought yesterday for tonight's New Year's Eve party. It's really cute, really festive, so I'm definitely here celebrating New Year's Eve. So first book we're gonna start with, I don't know if I should start the top part or the lower part. I'll start with the lower part. So first book I see is Claire Keegan, Small Things Like These. So this is a very interesting book and very important as it talks about what happened in Ireland for many years, how Catholic Church was part of this abuse against women, young women, taking away their kids. And there was a new movie released with Cillian Murphy. I think watching the film without reading the book might be confusing and boring, so I would recommend to read this book. Definitely made my year. It goes there. I'm not gonna say it's life-changing, but it was definitely very much a favorite of the year, and I will recommend it to everyone who will listen to me. Next is Ismail Kadare and his Dictator's Call. I cannot see the full name, but I think it's Dictator's Call. So it was one of the last few books that I read, and it took me a while to finish because once my master started, I just cannot read as much as I used to. So basically, this book reenacts possible phone conversation dialogue between Stalin and Pasternak. It's a very important book, I think, for those who love Russian literature and understand it. I do think it will be boring for those who don't have any understanding of the Soviet Union and Stalin times and Russian literature. So I think it's very specifically catered to people either from that part of the world or really interested in that historical time period or just literature. So for me, definitely the book made my year. Didn't change my life, but it was one of the best books I read this year. But I also understand that it might be quite boring to some, so take it as you will. Next book, Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall. I must say, this one is really hard to decide whether it was life changing or made my year, because I think it was one of the first books I read this year, and I just remember being so into it, and like everything I was reading there was really opening my eyes to the reality of geopolitics. So it really gives good explanation of things for people like me who, for example, didn't think of politics from the perspective of geography. I think it's a very interesting read. However, was it life changing or did it just make my year better? That's the question, and I think it's not as influential as other books I read this year, so I will put it to made my year. So far, all the books go there, but yeah, it was definitely a great read, and if you are trying to learn more about geography, political geography, it's a good one to start with. Next is Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and this is the first book to go into silly little books category. So this is the second book in the series of Before Coffee Gets Cold. Um, yeah, I don't know. It was just one of those books that you need to read to cleanse your palate, that are just there. It's not going to be influential. It's not going to take too much time. It's not going to take too much out of you, you know. But they were good. They weren't a waste of paper. And I would recommend it to people who are looking for something chill and easygoing. Definitely a type of read to get you out of your reading slump. And next is Atomic Habits. This book I was reading while going through 75 Hard. It was a present from one of my close friends. I definitely learned a lot about setting new habits and how to keep up with them and how to get rid of bad habits. I think this is one of those self-help books that are really good that I would recommend to everyone. And yet I'm having a hard time putting it either into life-changing category or made my year category, because I think I will be rereading this book, so I'm gonna put it into life-changing category, but I must say, it's like not as life-changing as other books, I think. I really don't know. Should I put it into made my year or life-changing? Okay, I'm gonna put into life-changing, but it's not like creme de la creme of creme de la creme. It's just like good enough to learn something from it. So, okay. I'm taking it way too seriously. It's okay to put Atomic Habits into life-changing books. Next book is a memoir of Clarissa Ward. Lately, her name is being associated with not a very good event. So basically, if you are not following the news, Clarissa Ward, she is a CNN senior correspondent. She went to Syria once Assad's regime fell, and she was filming moment of one of the prisoners being freed from prison, and then later it turns out this prisoner wasn't even a prisoner. He was one of Assad's intelligence officers, so basically high up part of the regime. And yeah, I think a lot of people now don't like her because of that, but I must say I read this book before that event. I don't know if I would read it now, because that was not the best moment, but her memoir is really interesting. She had a very unique life, I would say, and I must give her credit because the credit is due. This woman is brave to be in those war zones, dangerous zones, but then also now everyone is questioning all of her career and like everything she has ever done. But this book also talks a lot about Syria, because she was there covering events like, when did it start? Like 10 years ago. So when I was reading this book, I was like, this is so sad how many people disappeared and died during the whole Syrian civil war. At the time, I didn't know that, in a few months, basically, the regime will fall. So I was really upset reading this book, but now I'm basically like, I think it's an interesting book to read about journalists' experience in Syria, but also she talks about so many other countries. So I do think this book made my year. But whether you want to read it or not is totally up to you. But I do think this is one of the best memoirs I have read. So it goes into made my year, not life changing because of the events I talked about already. Okay, moving on. Next is my first Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye. I said in my video books I want to read this year, a year ago. If you watched that, if you haven't, go watch it if you care. I said I want to read her books, or at least one of her books, and I did. And it's honestly heartbreaking story and so powerful and so important. And I can totally see why Toni Morrison is always being regarded as one of the most influential writers, not only in the US, but also of world literature, because stories she talks about are stories of community that usually wouldn't have their voice heard. So definitely a life-changing book. And I think not many books, fiction books, go into that category. So this was definitely one of the most important books I have read this year. Next is Yellow Face by R.F. Kuang. So I think it's somewhere between Made My Year and Silly Little Books. I don't think it's silly in the sense that it talks about important topics of who gets to talk about communities of color. Like, is it only reserved for people of color to talk about their communities, or is it for white people too? And then how should it be done? So I think it's also because it's an irony and like this interesting take on this subject. It makes it more fun and more silly, therefore. But I do think in itself it touches on very important topics that make it definitely worth reading. This is my first R.F. Kuang, and I know there's so many more important books that she has written, but I think I'm gonna put it to Made My Year, because I always recommend it to people, and I don't think it's that silly. It's not the type of book I read and I'm like gonna forget about it. The next one, Sayaka Murata's Earthlings. I really loved her, Sayaka Murata's convenience store woman, or woman from convenience store, something like that. I read it last year, loved it, bought this one, read it in one day, but I was like, what the hell did I just read? But like in a good way. So I will put it into silly little books for sure, because like I'm not gonna recommend it to other people because it was really weird. But then at the same time, I see what she was trying to do there. But then at the same time, I think there are books that are like for certain readers, and I don't think I'm that reader. I would read books for those readers still, because I'm interested in different ways people tell stories these days. That's the beautiful part about contemporary literature. However, I don't think that I really can put it into Made My Year category. Okay. Next is The Stranger by Albert Camus. So I don't remember now which one I read first. I think The Stranger, because there's another Albert Camus book I read this year. So I honestly always wanted to read him because, people always talk about Albert Camus. And when I read it, I was like, this is really good. But now it's been a year, I think, since I read it, almost a year, and I don't really remember much. And I'm like, like also learning about the war in Algeria and his, let's say, weird take on it, because he's from there, but he's French, and he was basically against the liberation of Algeria from the French. So that all makes it like, I don't know. I think I'm gonna put it into Made My Year. I think it's still a good work of literature that everyone should read. It's a classic. But yeah, I wouldn't say it changed my life. Next book, I don't even need to tell you where I'm gonna put it. I'm just gonna say Edward Said, Orientalism. Where do you think it goes? Of course, life-changing. When I just finished this book, I gave it 4 stars because I was like, I expected more from it. Like, I expected him to debunk those stereotypes about Muslims and Arabs. But as a year went on and I would bring it up in my conversations, I realized he did that. He didn't like chew it up for me. But he did that for all of us, especially if you are Muslim or Middle Eastern, or you're from the Orient, and you still face discrimination and stereotypes, and it's just like all goes unnoticed. And once you read this book, you will realize how the reason why we have it today is like so deeply rooted with colonialism and them institutionalizing this racism. It just will open up your eyes to the realities of this world and white supremacy. Okay, so I talk about this book a lot, and I'm actually using it now for my thesis as one of my academic literature sources. So yeah, definitely gonna reread it at some point. And I think I changed my rating, by the way, to 5 stars because I realized that no, it's much more influential than when I just finished it, that I thought it was, because I talk about it a lot. So, life changing. Next book is Khalil Gibran, Prophet. It was a gift from my close friend when I was moving from Prague to Brussels, and I'm so glad she gifted it to me because I was always thinking I need to buy it, but then I was always putting it for some other time. And it's such a simple read, but it's so important. And let me just say straight away, I'm putting it into life-changing category. It's a book that's perfect for people like me who question I guess their religious beliefs, and who are spiritual, but at the same time, like, you have questions. I think this book cannot be described, it needs to be read. It's very poetic. It like answers so many questions. And actually, I even sent to my parents one of the poems, or parts from the book, and they enjoyed it as well. My parents are not that big on literature. Maybe my mom was when she was younger, but definitely not my dad. And even he found those words like very influential, and he agreed with them. He didn't say it directly, but later on he kind of brought it up, like what I said. There's this part about basically parents and children. If you'll be reading, you'll understand. And it's a very powerful book. It's definitely life-changing. I'm getting like emotional talking about it. I will definitely be rereading it in the future, and I'll be recommending it to everyone. Next is A New Earth, second book by Eckhart Tolle that I read. His first one, The Power of Now, I read back in 2020, I think. I think it was during COVID, like the whole spiel, and no one was leaving the house. Everyone was depressed. I had anxiety. Maybe a bit before that, actually, because it was like the time when I moved to my husband's country, and I was really going through hard times, and I needed some help. And that book really like opened my eyes, but I think at the time I didn't understand truly like the spiritual aspect of it, and I think I was more prepared for it with A New Earth. And I think it's because of my love for yoga that I understand much more this Eastern philosophy kind of that he's talking about. I'm not saying he invented it, and he's not saying that either, but I think it's a really good guide for those who are trying to achieve serenity and peace within themselves. I think it's a very important book to read, so I will put it into life-changing category, because it was very influential. Next is Anton Chekhov and his Uncle Vanya. I read it in Russian, of course, but I think this book is so influential that people always talk about. Well, basically, it's his play, and people always talk about Uncle Vanya, Cherry Orchard, and The Seagull. So those three, I feel like you always hear about. If you hear Anton Chekhov, these are the plays that you hear about a lot. And I must say, this is one of my favorites of this year. So it goes into made my year category. It made me cry. It was super easy to read, but I still remember the feelings. So I liked it. Okay, so moving on, we have Joan Didion, Blue Nights. So basically, I made it into a tradition to read a book or two of Joan Didion per year because I really love her writing, and she really inspires me. Like, whenever I read her writing, I'm like, I need to be a writer, you know what I mean? So it's important to read good literature to write. Duh. So However, this book, I think I'm gonna put into made my year category. It was very heartbreaking. It talks about, doesn't really talk about it, but it was written as a tribute to her daughter who passed away right after her husband, John Didion's husband. So they went away right after each other, and she was basically left alone. And it's so sad, it's so tragic. And this book is not the type of book that is like, poor me, because it's Joan Didion. She would never do that, right? But it does it in a way that you feel so sad for her, but it's not pity, it's not, oh, poor little Joanne, it's just like, I love you. Like, you lived such a great, wonderful life, and I'm so sorry this happened to you. Um, it's definitely not my favorite Joan Didion, but it's Joan Didion, so I love everything she writes. So it goes into made my year. It was very heartbreaking. It made me cry, but I wouldn't say it was life changing like her The Year of Magical Thinking, for example. I think everyone can agree that one is just creme de la creme, and it's also sad, it's also tragic, but there's a reason why that book became the book when we talk about Joan Didion. Next one is the very first one to go into honorary mentions, and that is The Light on Yoga by Iyengar. So basically, this book just talks about yoga and shows you how to do different yoga poses. And I really enjoyed the first part talking about like spiritual aspect of yoga, and that yoga is not just poses, it's so much more. It's like pranayama technique, which is like breathing, right? Then meditation, and it's what you eat. That's why yogis are vegetarians, vegans, because it's like big part of yoga, not just like as an activity like exercises, but spiritual aspects of it. So it was so influential, I think, and this is why I'm putting it into honorary mentions, because these are the books that basically, it's hard to say like it was amazing or it wasn't amazing. It's just like beyond that, books that not necessarily changed my life but were very important to read this year. Next book on Palestine by Noam Chomsky and Ilan Pappé. So I bought this book because I'm writing my thesis on the coverage of Israel-Palestine war, the current one. So I was reading it, preparing for my preliminary introduction, and I must say it is life-changing, and everyone needs to read it. If this is the first book you're reading on Palestine, you have to read it. Like, it's a good one to start with, and it talks a lot about what is the right way to talk about this conflict, what has been done so far, why US is complicit in this ongoing genocide. And basically this book is like a guide how to be an activist and support Palestine. But as it is written by Noam Chomsky and Ilan Pappé, two academics, very outspoken on the human right abuse in Palestine, yeah, it's more than just a book. It's just honestly such a great work that I think I'm gonna be coming back to, not just for my thesis, but overall, and I'm gonna recommend to everyone to read. Next book is the first one to go into what a waste of paper category. Honestly, Bunny, like, I saw it so much on TikTok. I saw people saying that this is dark academia, and I love dark academia. Donna Tartt's The Secret History changed my life. I think about that book at least once a week. Like, somehow it always comes back to it, It's a great book. It invented dark academia, I will say so. And there's so many books that call themselves dark academia or are being called that, and this book has nothing to do with Donna Tartt and like her The Secret History. Like, it has nothing, okay? This book is just absolutely awful. I don't know how people enjoyed it. Like, I saw so many TikToks, I saw so many videos, people saying this is funny. I didn't get it. It was really silly. And I mean, Sayaka Murata's Earthlings is confusing, but I see where she is going. With Bunny, I need to read more of Mona Awad to understand if she is just not for me or it's just this book. But I really expected this book to be something great, something enjoyable. But first half of the book I was having fun, but then it just all got so confusing, so weird. I understood in the end what was happening, but I just didn't enjoy it. And I don't think it's a good book, and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. And if you enjoyed this book, I'm sorry, but I think it wasn't for me. Next book is Tender is the Flesh. I can't see the name of the writer and I cannot remember it currently. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry. But Tender is a Flesh was recommended to me by one of my friends in Prague, and so I bought it, and I think the timing was not right. I think this book was made to be read in October, leading up to the Halloween, because it's like very gory and very gruesome. Okay, it's just too much. And I think because I was reading it in April, it was hot, I was on a tram, and I just remember being nauseous from all the descriptions of blood. So basically this book talks about people eating people because we cannot eat meat anymore. I have been a vegetarian, pescatarian to be precise, for 15 years, and for me, like, graphic details of meat, there's nothing worse than that. I hate the smell of meat. I don't like the look of it. Of course, I'm not gonna say anything if anyone is eating it next to me, but to me, it's disgusting. Like, I don't like meat. And reading about human flesh was so much worse. It was just not the vibe. I don't know whether to put it into, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna put it into silly little books. I mean, it wasn't silly, but I was really disappointed with the ending. I think it was great up until the ending. It was kind of close to made my year because it was very shocking and interesting, but then the ending really, like, I was like, really, this is it? No. It's a no for me, but I would still recommend it to other people. That's why it's not going into What a Waste of Paper. It's going to silly little books. Next is Cherry Orchard by Anton Chekhov, like I told you already. Just like Uncle Vanya, it's one of the most well-known plays of his, and I remember going actually with my high school to watch this play, and I haven't read it at the time. I just went, and luckily I kind of forgot everything that happened during the play, so when I was reading the book or the play, I was actually like surprised. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think I'm gonna put it into made my year, because it's definitely not a silly little book, but it wasn't life-changing. Next book is a self-help book that made me realize that I hate self-help books, and it goes into What a Waste of Paper, and that is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, and it was just so bad. I was gonna DNF it, and I never DNF books, but this one made me come so close to considering DNFing it. My husband was like, you should, like, just leave it. But I couldn't. I just needed to be done with it. But honestly, I should have DNF'd it. It's a stupid book. I think it's irrelevant. It was written in the 60s. And it's like common sense knowledge that I can't believe some people find this like mind-blowing information that I would never have considered before reading this book. So I think the timing, 2024, for this book is just not the right time. It's very American. It's like very like how to sell your product, how to do this, how to do business. And I feel like we're just so done with this version of capitalism, at least, or at least I am. Like, I cannot take it anymore. And like this whole like how to sell this, how to sell that, money, money, money. And it's just like how to use people, how to influence people. And it's just like, come on, man. Like, who needs this? I didn't need that. I should have DNF'd it. Next book is Jaded by LLE. I think this book didn't really make my year, but when I put it into silly little book, I'm not saying that it's silly. I'm saying it's just like kind of the type of book that it's just like, it was good, but not my favorite, you know, like compared to other books I read this year, it goes here, but I would say it's a really great book, and it's her debut novel, and I think that's very inspiring that a young woman can write a book like this and get it published. Like, it's amazing. It's wonderful. I love celebrating young women writers, journalists. So when I put it into this category, it's in no way, shape, or form like saying anything bad about this book. It just like, because of other books I read this year, it goes here. It's an important story of a young lawyer being essayed by her co-worker, and then how that story unfolds, and the corporate not being humane, so I think it's an important book to read. I would recommend it to everyone. So yeah, moving to the next one, I Sat Alone by the Gate. Honestly, here I need to put it into honorary mentions because I did interview the writer. Mary Effendi was actually the first guest this year on my channel. The first. Did I have anyone else? So when I was still doing my podcast, which I don't know anymore if I'm going to be continuing that, she agreed to be on my podcast. We talked and honestly connected. I feel like I know her, so I cannot judge this book. So I'll be honest, I'm putting it into honorary mentions because I'm biased. She is Azerbaijani, and she basically wrote this based on her story, but fictionalized as well. So it's difficult to judge these books, so I'm putting it there. It's a good one, and it's also a debut novel, so yeah, you should read it. Next book is Chakra Healing. This one also goes into honorary mentions because I cannot judge this book because it's definitely something for self-development. It was for me to learn about chakras and understand kind of like psychosomatics connected to like different feelings of being sick. I'm not gonna say to all sicknesses because of course like no one is saying medicine is not important. It is, but I think sometimes it's also our mental health that's behind that, and healing your chakras can be helpful, but it's up to you to believe or not to believe. Okay. Okay, so next is Lovers in the Night by Miyako Kawakami. I'm gonna put it into Made My Year, but honestly, I love Miyako Kawakami, but I think if it would have been Breast and Eggs, I would put it into Life Changing. But Lovers in the Night didn't have that same effect on me. I did enjoy it, however. It was a great book. But I think I loved it because I already read her two other books and I knew she's a great writer, a great storyteller, so I was already kind of like biased in it. But the book in itself, maybe not as life changing as her Breast and Eggs. Next one is Will Storr, The Science of Storytelling. I think I'm gonna put it into silly little books because I really was reading this book expecting to learn how to uh, write a book, okay? Because as a journalist, I'm more comfortable writing nonfiction than fiction. And honestly, it did kind of give you some advice, but I wouldn't say it was really something I can use that much. And I think the whole book could have been much shorter because he just like uses examples on, and it's just like, okay, dude, we got it. Let's move along. So yeah, it goes into silly little books. If you're trying to write a book, I don't think this book is that helpful. Next is Richard Osman's The Thursday Murder Club. I love this book, but I must say it's a silly little book that I can recommend to people when they're like, I'm stuck, I want something easygoing, something fun. This is a book for you. So it goes into silly little books. I'm currently reading his second The Thursday Murder Club book. I expected to be done with it, but honestly, uni is difficult and it's hard to do both like readings for uni, for my thesis, and for my own pleasure. So we'll see how next year will go, but this year I'm very slow. Maybe I should talk to someone by Lori Gottlieb. I still don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right or wrong. I think honestly cannot decide if it's life-changing or Made My Year because it was a really great book and made me cry, made me feel all sorts of emotions, but I think it's Made My Year category more than life-changing. However, very close to that. I would call it life-changing only as in like it tells you about the importance of therapy, but at the same time I didn't like learn anything from it. I think it's just great to read it if you're going through something, and to read about other people going through something of their own can be helpful to not feel alone when you're going through these like mental health. There's less and less books. Let's wrap it up, shall we? Next is Mikhail Bulgakov's The Dog's Heart. I'm gonna put it into I don't know because it's Bulgakov. I can't decide if it's still a little book or Made My Year. Because I do think about it I think sometimes I do. But did it make my year? I'm gonna put it into made my year because it's Bulgakov and I love his Master and Margarita. But I also think it's like not his best work, but also it is very important in terms of like talking about um, Russian Revolution and how everything changed for people who had money and power, you know? And I really didn't appreciate the way he portrayed basically proletariat as dogs being transformed into humans, you know? Because I already said it in my previous videos talking about books I have read so far this year, so I'm not gonna repeat myself, but if you haven't watched those videos, basically I think that the only good thing about Soviet Union, okay, one of a few good things, is that they gave knowledge. They brought knowledge to all the peasants and they made people educated. It was mandatory. That was great. And in that way, I don't agree with this. And I think it's just maybe it is silly little book. Maybe it is. Should I put it into silly little books? I don't know. I think, it sounds so bad to put Bulgakov there, but I have a feeling that it goes to silly little books. Does it though? I think so. Dolly Alderton's Everything I Know About Love. So this one goes into silly little books because it wasn't life changing and it did not make my year. I think I am too old for it. I'm 29 and I feel like this book is more for teenage girls or early 20 girls. For me, it was kind of like been there, done that. Also, could not relate to her. She's a white British girl who had different life path than me, an immigrant from Kazakhstan living in Europe. You know, like I think we're just we wouldn't be friends. But I think she's a great writer. I will try out something else from her. Try out like read something else. But this one personally had no impact on me whatsoever. Next is Agatha Christie, and then there were none. I think I'm putting it into silly little books because honestly, it was nothing special, but I see how it was influential for so many other uh, detective movies and books. You know, it's an important book, but when I was reading it, I was kind of bored because like exactly, I already saw this plot basically in so many other works. So maybe if I would be reading it back then when it just came out, I would have been like it made my year, changed my life, but not today, honey. It's December 31st, so people started already with the fireworks and everything, so I gotta wrap it up because it's like very loud. Next book is another honorary mention, and it is Quran, and I feel like I need to say why I read Quran for obvious reasons. I think it's obvious that as a Muslim, um, I wanted to read it. On the other hand, I feel like it raised so many more questions I have regarding religion and made me realize even more that I think I don't know where I fit. Like, I think I'm an agnostic, which is basically like a person who believes that there might be something after, but also accepts that there might not be something. Um, but I think my spiritual beliefs are very simple in that I do feel God with me, you know, but I don't know um, what religion I'm part of, if I am even of any. But yeah, I kind of expected to find answers, but I wouldn't say I did. But I think it was an important book for me to read, and it's not something I can say it was a good book or a bad book. You know, it was for my own soul, and there's that. I definitely want to read other like religious books just to kind of from a research perspective, just to research what's out there, and to see more, I guess, to understand more. So yeah. Next book is Nabokov and his Pnin. I'm having a hard time remembering because I cannot see even the name of the book. I just see the cover and I'm like, oh yeah, I know this one. So this one, I don't know if it was made my year or even life changing. Was it life changing? I think in a way it was life changing because as an immigrant, I kind of related to this book and it also made me really sad for that generation of Russian immigrants who were moving away from Russia after revolution, unable to go back home. Yeah, you know what? It's life changing in a way that I could relate to it on such a deep level. And I think it was like very beautiful the way it was written. It was very simple and funny at times, but I feel like as an immigrant, like Pnin reminds me, my friends, those of us who are just like immigrants and are just lost, I feel like missing our home country, but at the same time, like trying to find our way in our new country, you know? Ah, why am I feeling emotional now talking about it all of a sudden? But yeah, I didn't expect this book to be as influential as apparently it is, because I'm now feeling a lot talking about it. Okay, next is Malcolm X. And if you are a regular viewer of my channel, you know this book. I talk about it. I love it. I love Malcolm X, and it goes to life changing. I think about this and Orientalism all the time. Like these books are so influential, so important. And honestly, Malcolm X being such an outspoken person talking about African American rights and Islam as someone who converted and saw beauty in it, like that always made me feel this like connection to him as a historical figure. And it's not very common to feel connection to historical figures, right? So I think Malcolm X will forever be in my heart. Like he means so much to me. And I don't know how to explain it, but he was just a unique person, and I will forever love him. And I don't know how else to say it. It was just life changing. And the last book is The Fall by Albert Camus. I'm gonna put it into Made My Year because, like, honestly, Albert Camus is important. He's an important writer. Oh wait, I put it kind of like a bit above. Okay. He was an important writer and an important thinker, so it's definitely a great book. Both of them, The Stranger and The Fall. I like them much more than I did his Plague. So yeah, but at the same time, it wasn't life changing, you know. But it was a great work that I needed to then listen a podcast about to understand philosophical moments that I wasn't sure if I got them right. And actually, I did. So I'm smart, okay? Okay, that really is it. I talked about all 35 books I read this year. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and Happy New Year. I hope this year will be full of only good things, and we all need happiness and stability and prosperity. And I hope this year will be that for all of us. Thank you so much for watching this video. My goal for next year is 40 books. I'm gonna keep you updated. We'll see if with my master's thesis now I will actually have time to read books for my own pleasure, because so far I have no free time for anything. So yeah, we'll see if that will happen or not. Follow me on Goodreads to see the progress. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next one. I love you. Bye.